Who will debunk the debunkers? Today, I'm going to be debunking Robert Reich's debunking of the 10 biggest myths about our economy.
We've made this series of videos which debunk the most common and destructive myths about our economy. Economics is an objective science that has nothing to do with politics or morality. Bunk?
Not bunk. Economics is a value-free science. It doesn't teach you what your ends should be. It only comments on whether your means are suitable for achieving your ends.
If you really want to understand the economy, you have to understand politics and also morality. They're treated as separate fields, separate disciplines. Each has its own experts and specialists, but the three are completely intertwined. In fact, through most of the 1800s, the field of study that we call economics was called political economy. People who studied it saw that the two fields were the same. Adam Smith, the Scotsman who wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, is considered the father of economics, especially by conservatives, but he never called himself.
I do not consider Adam Smith the father of economics. I consider Richard Cantillon to be the father of modern economics, as he preceded Smith and had a more complete understanding of the science, as demonstrated in his work Un essai sur la nature du commerce en général. Not sure why I put this Spanish GH on there. Even that's misleading, as it ignores the contributions of Spanish scholastics, of Turgot, even the physiocrats, not to mention the contributions of the great St. Thomas Aquinas. But Robert Reich raises a good question here. Are politics and economics fundamentally one and the same subject? Of course, they're intimately connected, related. And I mean, that raises the broader question of, hey, what is economics in the first place? Mises would say that economics is really a subset of praxeology, the science of human action. But no, I think it makes sense to differentiate between politics and political action on one hand, and the study of market economy on the other. Certainly, there's going to be overlap. You have to examine the impact of policy on the market economy, but that doesn't mean those things are the same thing. It just means that it's an interdisciplinary field of study.
An economist. He called himself a moral philosopher. Why? Because he was really interested in the meaning of a good society. That's what it's all about, or should be all about. What sort of society do we want? These are basically moral questions. A society has the ability to make its own rules and determine how much inequality is acceptable, how much poverty. Is slavery acceptable? Is it okay for young children to have to work? Should there be a minimum wage? Is it okay for an adult who works 40 hours a week or more to earn so little that her family is impoverished? Is it okay for children of the super
Okay, these are leading questions.
wealthy to inherit so much wealth they never have to work a day in their lives? When we talk about morality, we can't avoid the issue of power. How much power should the wealthy have? Is it okay for a corporation to monopolize a market? Is it okay for workers to join together to form a labor union? In the late 19th century, economists began to de-emphasize politics and morals. They started treating economics as more of a science and less of a philosophical study that took into account morality.
Of course, morality is very important, but that's a whole separate field of inquiry. And some of those questions he raised were economic questions, um, like, for example, should there be a minimum wage? Some were moral questions. Should should people be able to inherit wealth? Which, by the way, I think it's a pretty obvious yes, simply on the basis of property ownership. If you own something, if you create wealth in your lifetime, why should you not be able to pass that on to your children or whoever you want? Why what is the argument against that? Certainly, I would rather people be able to pass on their wealth to their children or whoever than to have the state take it. It's not even close.
Alfred Marshall's monumental work, Principles of Economics, established economics as its own science in 1890. But economics, politics, and morality cannot be separated. We need to see the moral underpinning
What's with the economic history subplot to this video?
of economics.
I don't think he made the case there that economics isn't objective. Really, his argument was that economics is really part of political economy and morality. I think that's a pretty bold claim that's not really substantiated by anything.
That's bunk.
I mean, it's tautologically true. Government obstructs the free market. Free means free from government intervention.
Politicians of all stripes talk as if the rules that govern the economy are determined either by the free market or by government. But that's wrong. There can't be a choice between the free market and government because a market cannot exist.
Okay, but you can still have a choice between a free market and a market with government intervention. Even if this was true, which I don't accept, but even if it was true that the government has to make like the rules of the road, like property rights exist and you can't steal or do fraud, uh, that doesn't that doesn't mean that you can't have a free market. The free market just means that the government's not allowed to pick one participant as a winner, like with a subsidy or a grant of monopoly privilege. They can't play favorites. They're still allowed to make the rules of the road, such as establishing property rights. That's okay. That doesn't infringe upon the concept of free market. Free market just means that anyone can participate, anyone can sell. There's no restrictions on entry, and the government doesn't subsidize one firm at the expense of the others. They've all got to compete against each other, providing ultimately the best quality at the lowest price for the consumer.
Without a government to organize and enforce it. A market is an arena where goods and services are exchanged. How that market functions depends upon rules determined by government. The rules govern property, what can be owned, monopoly, what degree of market power is permissible.
So, two, it's not really important as per Austrian monopoly theory, which basically states that absent a grant of monopoly privilege, no harmful monopoly can result. So already I differ on Article 2. I agree Article 1, there needs to be property rights. Whether those need to be established or enforced by the state, I think is an open question. I think that people sort of naturally have respect for property rights, natural law, societal norms, whatever. But the government doesn't really need to impose Article 2 because without you don't need the government to adjudicate what's a monopoly, what isn't. Basically.
Contracts. What can be exchanged and under what circumstances? Bankruptcy. What happens when borrowers can't pay up? And how is all...
But again, this has nothing to do with the concept of a free market, which is just that the government can't intervene in the market. Not that rules can't be established so that commerce can happen. That's completely different from government intervention, like establishing quotas or tariffs or subsidies.
All of this
I think he's just being disingenuous at this point. He's got to understand
enforced.
that, surely.
These rules are decided on one way or another by human beings. But who exactly and whose interests are they represented? Over the past few decades, large corporations, Wall Street, and wealthy individuals have gained increasing influence over politics. Corporate PAC spending has reached hundreds of millions.
Yeah, well, this is a problem because the state has so much power, so people are going to fight over that power. If the state had very limited power, then this wouldn't be an issue in the first place. This is he's basically like his ideology of statism, and government intervention, and welfarism, and government spending is directly responsible for this issue. And he's using this as like a rationalization for why things have to why this, he's saying this is a problem, but it's a problem directly as a consequence of the ideas that he advocates for. So this is really an indictment of Robert Reich and his whole philosophy of statism. The fact that $1 trillion or whatever, $1 billion was spent by Kamala Harris. What should she spend? Yeah, so the fact that the Kamala Harris campaign spends billions of dollars, the fact that there's so much money involved in politics and elections, that's all because the state has such intense powers of taxation and spending. Whereas if people listen to libertarians and the state had very minimal role in society, then there would be no need to have these PAC contributions or no purpose, and things would be much better.
Of dollars a year. Business lobbyists spend 68 times as much on lobbying as labor unions. And big corporations march into courtrooms with platoons of lawyers. Simultaneously, centers of countervailing power that between the 1930s and 1980s enabled America's middle and lower middle class to exert.
So leftists always point to this era, the 1950s, as like some great time for America. And then in the 1980s, Reagan came to power, neoliberalism, and destroyed everything. But actually, the 1950s was much more libertarian, or government spending was much smaller in the 1950s, especially non-defense spending. It was a fraction of what it is today or in the 80s. So I don't know why these people point to that time period as if that's what they want to go back to. Like, okay, let's do it. let's get rid of all the spending programs, and let's have government spending at like 15% of GDP.
Their own influence have withered. For example, labor union membership has fallen from a third of private sector workers in the 1950s to just 6%.
No, maybe people realize that labor unions can't really accomplish anything. That ultimately wages are determined by productivity, and unions are impotent to affect change.
Percent in 2023. Small businesses.
Why does he think that happened? It's certainly not because, there's so many uh, special privileges afforded by government to unions that hasn't been rolled back at all. So clearly, people are rejecting unions.
Have been replaced by giant big box and online retailers.
And these big box and online retailers, they allow people, for example, at Walmart, the convenience of one-stop shopping. That's a big deal if you don't have a car, if you're, lower income. Their low prices allow you to maximize the value of your dollar. Amazon's even more convenient. You don't even have to leave your home. You're short on time, you're working a lot, relatively low wage. That's tremendously convenient. Or if you can't leave the home, if you're disabled or something, bam, they bring it right to you. So these guys are great. They employ a ton of workers, and they ensure consumers get access to low prices. The reason why they replaced small stores is because the small stores charge so much more. They're basically ripping consumers off.
Small investors by giant institutional investors. Political parties, once anchored at state and
I mean, anybody can invest. You can buy fractional shares. Stock ownership, I think, is at all-time highs. Especially if we consider pension plans.
local levels have become giant Washington-based fundraising machines. As a result, the rules of the American economy are now largely organized by big corporations and those
For example, what rules?
with great wealth for their own gain. Ever larger upward distributions inside the market from the poor and working class.
What rules? You're gonna make a claim. You should elaborate on it. What rules are you talking about? How did they rig the game? Maybe they did, but how did they do it?
To the top have become normalized as functions of a market that is assumed to be neutral. But remember, markets are not neutral. They reflect who wields power. Get ready for this lie. The richest people have worked the hardest and therefore deserve.
Whether they've worked the hardest or not, certainly they deserve their wealth. If you look at Bezos or Bill Gates, both of those created something incredible that transformed the world. Bill Gates brought personal computing to the masses. Even our grandparents can use a Windows PC. It's point and click. It's very intuitive. Uh, the increase in productivity globally from Bill Gates alone, transformative. Of course, he deserves his billions. So does Jeff Bezos, for that matter. Amazon is an incredible company. You can get anything you want, anything. Uh, and before that just wasn't really possible or very difficult to find, And a lot of businesses thrive on Amazon and thrive through the use of Microsoft products, not just Windows. Microsoft has a lot of great software. So certainly in those cases, you look at somebody, you want to go back in time, look at somebody like Andrew Carnegie, who moved to America as a very poor Scottish immigrant child in a large family, started working in a factory, making very little money, working long hours, very low pay, and ended up as a tycoon of industry. So certainly, I would say, most billionaires probably worked extremely hard to get what they were, created a ton of wealth, and absolutely deserve their wealth.
Their
Absolutely,
wealth.
100%.
Bunk.
Who doesn't deserve his wealth is this Robert Wright guy, who has done nothing but lie and manipulate the public his entire career. This is somebody who doesn't deserve a penny of their wealth.
income and wealth increasingly depend on who has the power to set the rules of the game. CEO.
There's an element of truth there in that because the political system has become so powerful, the state has become so powerful, increasingly, if you want to get rich, the easiest way to do it is through the political process, and that's bad. But not what he's talking about. That's not true. I mean, this whole thing is just a lie, and it's just socialist propaganda. And Robert Reich is an awful, awful person.